Hi, Dave.
Hey, how are you?
Hi, I'm fine, thanks.
Yep.
Okay, so welcome to everyone that's already in the chat box. Thanks for your questions. Already a lot of them in there. So thanks a lot for joining us live. So, Dave, before we start, how is the new Baltic clinic going?
It's going well. We're actually in the process of setting up our own pharmacy. One of the challenges that we've run into is the many different laws and regulations of all the different countries in Europe, which we already knew would be a challenge, but turned out to be more challenging because they're all changing. So one thing that we're really passionate about making happen is getting the treatment to Scandinavia, and setting that up as a possibility there. So whether we create a relationship with a pharmacy there or ideally set up our own compounding pharmacy in Scandinavia, this is what we're really excited about doing, because if we set up a pharmacy in Scandinavia, it means other clinics can also use that pharmacy. So it means that people in Scandinavia can have a lot of options for treatment. So that's been a bit of an unexpected wrench in the machine, but it's going well. Primal Zone in Australia is going really well as well. So everything's going fantastically. And I've also recently partnered with Victory Men's Health in the US as well. So lots of exciting clinical stuff going on, with the goal of hopefully one day everyone in the world being able to access the best quality TRT treatment. That's the goal.
Yeah, let's certainly hope so. If I understood well, you're in Europe at least, you're only offering the cream.
Yes. So the pharmacy that we're currently working with, as well as the pharmacy that we're setting up, don't compound injections. The amount of infrastructure you need to compound sterile injections is enormous compared to what we need for topical creams. Generally, that infrastructure is already in place. Most compounding pharmacies do cream and orals and troches and sprays, but injectables is a big project. And we agreed that while it would be great to offer everybody injectable, the HRT cream, as well as having the other bases available as well, I think that if we've got multiple options for bases, not only does it make the product more suitable for more people, but I'm personally of the belief, and I'm sure people can challenge this, but that's okay. I think that both cream and injections are fantastic, but I think cream is better by a fraction, because it's more suitable for more people. A lot of people who get side effects on injections don't get them on cream due to things like liver issues and metabolic syndrome, which a lot of hypogonadal men have. But also from a logistical standpoint, it's just significantly easier to teach a bunch of men how to put a bit of cream on their ball sack than it is to teach them how to draw and inject and not create problems with that. So we'll be probably the first in the world cream only clinic, I imagine.
Yeah, great. But as you know, I'm a big fan of the cream. I've used it for over 7 years now. So yeah, I can recommend everyone to try it at least.
Absolutely. It's if you'd asked me a couple of years ago, I probably would have given a different answer, but I've been on cream now for the best part of 18 months, and it's been fantastic. I didn't have any problems with injections, but I've been able to get the exact, I didn't notice a subjective difference going from one to the other, except I no longer have to do injections. And nothing wrong with having to inject, but not having to inject is nice. And it's been great. And especially since we've had the HRT base available now in Europe as well, that there was nothing wrong with the liposomal base, but that base absorbs a hell of a lot quicker. So it's nicer to not have to stand around naked in the morning until you put your pants on. It's quite nice.
Yeah, 100%. Okay, let's switch to some questions in the chat box. There was a question there. What do you know about SLUPP332? I've just had to Google it. I don't know nothing about it.
They're calling it that. So people are abbreviating this to SLOOP, which I think is hilarious. It's a fantastic, out of all the research chemical SARM names, I think RAD 140 sounds pretty cool, but I think SLOOP sounds better. So this is Now, I will completely preface this. I am not fully versed on this. People have asked me about this, so I have looked into it, but I'm not an expert. Personally, I'm not really into the niche and novel pharmaceutical research chemicals. I think both Stephen and I are actually big advocates of not taking experimental drugs. I think that's a pretty good rule to have, because if it's not a life or death situation, taking something that's an unknown has, when we're looking at the risk to reward equation, the risk of the unknown is enormous. If you're healthy and you're taking a experimental research compound for the sake of putting on a bit of muscle or dropping a bit of body fat, I don't recommend rolling that dice over just doing the work of getting a little bit more uncomfortable with training and diet. So Sloop is a experimental estrogen receptor agonist. People are saying some very interesting things about what it does. I've read the research. I believe there is currently, I don't want to get this wrong, but I can't say that I know exactly, but there's less than 5 studies on it, all in rats. I believe there's 2 or 3 studies on it in rats. There's no studies on it in humans. And I don't even think there's any long-term studies on it in rats. So it's an experimental estrogen. It seems to be an estrogen analog or an estrogen agonist. It hasn't been studied in humans. It does some interesting stuff at the estrogen receptor that we know about. We have absolutely no idea what this does in humans. We have absolutely no idea what else this could do in humans. I think that from a lot of the research on other estrogenic compounds that are not bioidentical estrogens, synthetic estrogens, we know that these things are not good for things like cancer growth. So it's not something I would be messing around with personally. I'm just also going to put this out there. Find anyone online who's promoting this stuff who isn't selling it. That would be my my challenge.
Exactly. Always be very careful with experimental drugs. Shorting a few years ago, there was a worldwide rollout of some experimental jabs. I don't remember exactly why they were, but yeah, don't mess with those. All right. There was a question from Whisker. You can read along. I had lower than 10 nanograms per deciliter pregnenolone result from 9 a.m. fasted. I'm on testosterone cream, but 6 months in, I started getting morning and afternoon fatigue. I assumed thyroid and maybe pregnenolone DHEA. Just wondering what I should try. I do have T3 and NDT on hand. TSH has gone from 1.5 to 2.0 over these first 6 months on cream.
Man, what a perfect question for me to answer, because I sound like the biggest broken record of all time here. This is all I seem to say in the group these days, but I will say it again. If you have a hormone on hand and you have all these medications on hand, don't take them without guidance. I've had a lot of conversations with people recently in the group. Some have been very respectful, some have been very hostile, because a lot of people don't like this line of reasoning, which is totally fine. If people want to follow a different discourse, it doesn't impact how I sleep at night. But hormone replacement therapy is really complicated, especially if we're dealing with testosterone, pregnenolone, DHEA, thyroid all at the same time. There is no one in the world who is skilled enough to look at this amount of text and go, this is the hormone deficiency that you have, this is the dosing that you should take, and you could guarantee to get a good answer. Now, you might get lucky with it, for sure, but I think bad advice is worse than no advice. And the ultimate answer to this question, and to any question regarding what should I take, is get someone who knows what they're doing, who's an expert in the field, to go through your history, labs, blood work, and to create a proper strategic plan for you moving forward. I see guys all the time come to me, whether it's consultations, messages, emails, or they come through my clinics, and they are on the tail end of like 6 to 12 months of just randomly experimenting with different hormones. And they eventually get to the point where, you know, they've caused themselves a whole bunch of pain and suffering, and they haven't solved the issue. If the majority of the doctors in the world can't do this, you probably can't either. And that's no offense to the person asking the question. It's just real talk. I mean, I could go on YouTube all day and watch videos about car engines, and I'm not going to be able to service my own car. And like, this is more complicated than mechanics, in my opinion. Now, with this said, just to be able to at least provide some value, undetectable pregnenolone, it doesn't necessarily mean that you need pregnenolone, but it probably does. Now, that doesn't mean that you should just start taking it based off this video, because if you have deficiencies in DHEA and thyroid, if you just take pregnenolone, you're going to make those other deficiencies more pronounced. So if you take pregnenolone and you're low in pregnenolone, that's going to reduce stress, which is great. But if you're also hypothyroid and you've been running on stress, now you're not going to have any energy at all. So if you have undetectable pregnenolone, I've said this a few times, and I've got a masterclass on pregnenolone going up next month, and I'm going to cut some clips specifically for Stephen's channel so that we can have some bites for this to answer these specific questions. But generally, undetectable pregnenolone, especially over multiple lab tests, generally signifies that you probably need it. When it comes to thyroid, your TSH will fluctuate a lot, lab test to lab test, just based on what you had for dinner the night before, based on your stress levels, based on the weather and the tides, for all we know. So a 1.5 to 2 movement of TSH is not really significant. But if you want to look into the thyroid, you can look at things like antibodies for Hashimoto's, so TPG and thyroid globulin and anti-thyroid peroxidase antibodies are really worth checking. As well as your T3 and T4 levels as well, and hypothyroid symptoms. Testosterone symptoms in terms of hypogonadism and thyroid symptoms in terms of hypothyroidism are basically the same. So if you've dialed in your TRT and you've been on TRT long term and your thyroid is looking a bit suspect, you can run antibodies to check if there's an autoimmune activity against it. And if there is, in my opinion, if you've got thyroid issues, low DHEA, generally under 100 or under 150 if you're in the US using those units, and you've got low pregnenolone, and this is something that our friend Dr. Keith Nichols talks about, is that you bringing them all up together can be really helpful, but you definitely want to have someone steering the ship who has done this before and knows what they're doing.
Yeah, the same guy writes below in the chat now, I do have a clinic I work with. They did recommend T3 monotherapy. They have all my other markers too. I just ask in here because I know you are the expert on those specific deficiencies. Yeah, thank you.
Look, T3 monotherapy, I don't have anything against T3 monotherapy. I have stuff against T4 monotherapy. There are some people who it works for, but there are always outliers. It doesn't work for most people. T3 monotherapy, as long as it's not done excessively with a heavy hand, a lot of the time it doesn't cause a T4 deficiency, but it can. So initiating with T3 monotherapy, I would prefer to use natural desiccated thyroid. That's what we tend to gravitate towards in my clinics. But there's nothing wrong with T3 monotherapy. If they've got all your labs and they've got reasons for that, that's probably an educated, guided decision. It's just very important to monitor T4 levels during the treatment to make sure the T4 doesn't become deficient, because T3 can't enter every cell. There are cells in the body that T4 has to get into and then get metabolized locally into T3. So making sure that you don't become deficient in T4 over time is really important for T3 monotherapy. But I'd also consider addressing the pregnenolone deficiency at the same time. Again, speak to your provider about it. But thyroid's like an accelerator, testosterone's like an accelerator, and pregnenolone's like the brakes. So if you're already on testosterone and then you jack up the thyroid, that pregnenolone deficiency might become quite prominent symptomatically. So sometimes we do things one at a time. Sometimes it's good to do things in balance.
Ron asks, what's more appropriate in regards to dose frequency, dosing based on E2 or based on high-low SHBG levels? Which holds higher priority here?
Okay, that's a good question. I probably have differing opinions on this to other people. So if any of the other moderators in the group disagree with me, I don't mean this disrespectfully. I just mean this as a way to respectfully agree to disagree. One of my favorite things even about the Silverback Summit, actually, is when we all get up and talk about these topics, we all agree on like 90% of stuff. And the other 10%, I think it's great to have different opinions on. So in my opinion, I don't think SHBG is a big factor for injection frequency. Now, there are some pretty good arguments against that, and I recognize those arguments. I just don't think they hold as much weight in the decision as they should. So, or they are made out to be, sorry. I think that people should inject as often as they will. And for most people, that's 3 times a week. It's hard to get people to do daily injections long-term. If people will do daily injections long-term, if they're, you know, particularly disciplined, they like to do the same thing every day, they're like very routine-based, great, fantastic. Most people won't do that. When it comes to like a gen pop thing, like when you're working with people in a clinic who've just been on Google and found you, even getting them to do twice a week can be difficult, really difficult. So I like people to inject as often as they will. When it comes to SHBG, my general stance on it is that the lower the SHBG, the more often you need to inject. So if you've got an SHBG like under 20, then you really need to inject more often. But I would still argue that even if you have an SHBG of 50, 60, then you would still benefit from injecting just as often. It just might not be as necessary for you to do. And the reason is, and I would love to hear a counter argument to this, respectfully, of course, is that SHBG doesn't impact the half-life of the ester. And the half-life of the ester is the primary thing that determines injection frequency. As far as I'm aware, SHBG also doesn't impact the peak time of the medication either. So when it comes to SHBG, I think SHBG is more important for determining the free testosterone level, because that's going to be the primary thing that impacts how much free is unbound from total. Which is, I don't think that can really be refuted. I mean, everyone has to agree with that because that's a scientific fact. But when it comes to frequency, I don't think that, well, at least as far as I'm aware, I think that old argument that if you have high SHBG, you want to inject less often to push it down, I think that's kind of gone with the wind at this stage. I think that was a bro science thing that's kind of died, but maybe I'm wrong with that. But I think that SHBG is a little bit of a red herring when it comes to injection frequency. I think we should all inject as often as we will, because male hormone replacement therapy, the #1 priority from a clinical outcome standpoint is stability. Men do well with a daily hormonal rhythm. We don't do well with, you know, weekly or monthly hormonal rhythms. Not to offend anyone, I don't think women do particularly well with them either, but that's the way they're designed. I don't think anyone does well with hormone fluctuations. So stability is king. I think SHBG is important for determining dose, but I think that the lower your SHBG, the more often you have to inject, but I think everyone should inject more often regardless. I don't think serum estradiol has anything to do with injection frequency.
Mm-hmm. So the best option is just to switch to cream then?
Or switch to cream, yeah. Well, the great thing about cream is cream allows you to do twice daily administration. That's one of the best things about cream, is that you can have ultra stable levels. And, you know, twice daily cream delivers the same stability that people will get with daily injections. And daily injections are great if people will do them, but if you don't respond well to subcutaneous injections and you have to do intramuscular, which I think most people are in that camp, people aren't going to do that long term. Novelty wears off. It's not, people aren't.
Can you take Accutane while on TRT? And if so, is there anything to be careful about? Yeah, I'll answer that one. Of course, you can take Accutane. That's the brand name. Isotretinoin is the molecule name, the generic name. So it's used for acne and seborrheic skin. If you take Accutane, your skin will dry out. So being on TRT will stimulate the sebum production. So it will even be better and lessen the side effects of drying out. So I can't see why you shouldn't take them together if you both need them, of course. I have a lot of teenagers on Accutane, isotretinoin, and of course they also have high levels of testosterone, so I don't see any problem. The things that you should be careful about are the things drying out your skin, especially your lips, exposure to the sun. You'll be more sensitive to burning if you have a fair skin type, and not becoming pregnant for the women or trans men now. Those are the most important things.
Yeah, it's very important men don't become pregnant. Yeah, and just to kind of touch on the topic, obviously the reason why people are looking to take Accutane is because of acne. One thing that we find in Australia, one thing that we're blessed with in Australia is we have access to cypionate, enanthate, sustanon, every different carrier oil. And one thing that I know Jordan Grant has recently started speaking about as well, because when people become aware of this, then it becomes quite obvious, is that one of the causes of acne, we know that TRT in some circumstances will make acne worse. If the dose is too high, if the injection frequency is too low, these things will either cause acne or they'll make acne worse because the levels are too high, there's too much sebum production. There's a lot of reasons that everyone kind of knows about for that. But one commonly overlooked cause of acne on TRT is an immune system reaction to the carrier oil. So what I've found is about somewhere between 1 in 10 and 1 in 20 guys will react to cottonseed oil, sesame oil, or grapeseed oil. So, and I was doing a case study the other day that I was putting together for my friends over at Victory. We had a guy come in who had, free testosterone level in like the top quartile of the reference range. So still within range. He'd been on treatment for 6 months, doing 3 injections a week, perfect diet, no alcohol, no other inflammatory markers. And he was saying, I want to put my dose up because I don't have symptom resolution, but acne is just horrific. And in Australia, the quite common testosterone preparation is Primatestin, which is a preloaded syringe from Bayer, which comes in castor oil. And we've seen this a bunch of times where if we transfer these guys over to an MCT-based solution, which I think is the best because it draws and injects really quickly, it's a much thinner oil. So you can have a much quicker injection process. You can use a smaller needle. It will flow really well through a 29 gauge. So not only is it a nicer oil for everyone to use, but it's very, very unlikely to have an immune reaction to MCT, and acne completely resolved. So if someone's in a situation being like, TRT is giving me acne, and I've dialed in all other aspects of what should be causing acne problems, and I've done everything else, see if your provider can swap the carrier oil, ideally to MCT, otherwise to grapeseed oil if that's not the one you're currently using. And that can be really helpful for a lot of guys with these stubborn issues.
All right. Okay, you will love this one. I'm 46 years old. How much can drinking fenugreek tea and green tea 1 to 3 times a day raise my testosterone?
How much can it raise it? Probably not. Probably not a lot. Yeah, look, fenugreek is, so my first job out of university, I did my undergrad in digital marketing before I did my postgrad diploma when I went back in science. One of my first projects was from a very big supplement company, and it was basically writing all the website copy for all the different products. So it was a website that sold all different brands. And that was great because I was really interested in it. I was working for a gym at the time. It was a project I was doing on the side. And so I was looking into things like fenugreek, tribulus. Back then it was like D-aspartic acid was popular. This was before the Tongat Ali thing kind of did the rounds again. We were kind of in the lull when everyone before realized it didn't work, and then now people kind of don't realize that again. It kind of does cycles. But the problem with a lot of these natural testosterone boosters, particularly fenugreek, for example, is that it's just a 5-alpha reductase inhibitor. So if you do a study and you give people fenugreek, the testosterone levels go up, but the DHT levels go down. So when you market it, you can say, well, this is a testosterone booster because you've blocked one of the pathways that it goes down, so the serum levels will go up. But you've netted less androgen activity because DHT is a stronger androgen. So on paper, they can market this, and they do market it as a testosterone booster. but it's just a 5-alpha reductase inhibitor. So I wouldn't touch fenugreek. When it comes to green tea, I think green tea is great. I don't think it's going to do much for boosting testosterone, but green tea has a really nice balance of theanine and caffeine, so it's not too activating to the central nervous system. And it's full of antioxidants, which have been shown to have a variety of benefits. So I don't like the taste of green tea, but if you like the taste of green tea, then nothing wrong with that. But at 46 years old, if you're already experiencing like the male version of perimenopause, like the early like decline in age-related hormone testosterone production, you could drink all the fenugreek and green tea in the world, and it's not going to have a significant effect on androgens or symptoms.
Yeah. If you need testosterone, take testosterone.
Mm-hmm.
Have you ever heard of T3 not working? I have tried from 20 to 75 micrograms daily, all in the AM fasted, split AM, PM, different doses. Best protocol for fat loss. Yeah.
So I have seen synthetic thyroid hormones. When we're talking about thyroid treatment, synthetic, and you can have something be synthetic and still be bioidentical. I think people kind of get these things confused. But so T3 and or T4 are synthetic bioidentical thyroid hormone, kind of like the thyroid version of testosterone. And then natural desiccated thyroid in the context of a prescription comes from a pig's thyroid, but it is standardized to have T3, T4, as well as other thyroid hormones and enzymes and signaling molecules in it as well. So one of the issues with the synthetic thyroid treatments is that some guys just don't respond to them. And in these instances, like I've seen guys come into my clinics with taking 200, 300, 400 micrograms of T4, 50, 100 micrograms of T3, and their levels barely move. And, they'll still be taking it on an empty stomach. They'll make sure to not have any coffee or anything else with it to compromise absorption. It's coming from the pharmacy. They've checked every option. A lot of guys get a really poor response to this. A lot of guys get a fantastic response. I mean, this is not a common thing, but I would say a decent percentage of guys are non-responders to synthetic T3, T4. And when they swap to natural desiccated thyroid, the prescription version, they get a much better response. Now, there are also cases for vice versa. There are also guys who don't absorb and respond to the NDT, and they have a fantastic response to synthetic. So it's very important for practitioners to have both in the toolbox. I think that on average, more people respond better to natural desiccated thyroid. That's just what I've seen. But this is, assuming that this is a pharmaceutical grade product, I'm skeptical that it is because you're using it for fat loss. So firstly, you could just be taking a sugar pill, but let's hypothetically say that it is a pharmaceutical grade thyroid preparation. Yeah, it is possible that you're having a very low response to this and a non-significant response. In terms of like best protocol for fat loss, the best protocol for fat loss is diet and exercise. I'm not in the camp of using these hormones in this way purely for the sake of a do no harm approach. I know it's like a bit of like a party pooper, fuddy-duddy kind of response, but I'm hyper conservative in my recommendations. With that said, I think that if someone is going to use a stimulant to like cut weight, let's say like you're cutting weight for like a professional fight or something, boosting thyroid hormone is probably safer than using things like Clen or, whatever else people are using, like high dose ECA stack. Like I think people are still using that. So, supporting optimal thyroid function for fat loss is probably on the safer side, but hell will freeze over before I come online and recommend a standard dose of thyroid hormone for fat loss. It's just not something I'm going to do.
I'm on test cypionate 120 milligrams per week. My SHBG went from 17 to 16 over 12 weeks. I raised my dose to 180 per week for the past 8 weeks. My SHBG raised to 23. I did lose 15 pounds over that 8 weeks. Is it likely due to weight loss?
So the difference between an SHBG of 16 and 23 is non-significant. One thing that people often learn when they've been on treatment for a while is how much their labs will fluctuate. So, for example, I know this is not on this question, but even if you're doing daily injections of testosterone and you get your blood work measured at the exact same time relative to your last shot, you can expect fluctuations of like 30%. And this can often be quite startling for people because they're like, well, I'm injecting the same amount and I'm measuring it at the same frequency, so the serum should be the same. The body is a very complex, interconnected series of systems, and everything is an ebb and flow all the time. So yeah, a 17 to 16 to 23 SHBG, that's the same. If your SHBG went from 16 to 50, okay, there's something going on there. That's significant. Or if your SHBG went from 40 to 10, okay, cool, significant. But a few point fluctuation in SHBG, it could be related to the weight loss, but it also could be just non-related. It's possible that with the fat loss, insulin sensitivity improved and therefore SHBG went up. That's the mechanistic theory of how improving body composition would increase SHBG. But I would just be congratulating the individual on the fat loss and not really getting into the weeds over the change in the SHBG. I don't think it's significant.
Hi, Dave. I love your lecture on vitamin D. I'm taking all of the cofactors, but anytime I take much more than 2000 IU for too long, I begin to feel like garbage. I'm taking ZMA, K2, etc. Maybe calcium.
Interesting.
Is it possible people feeling issues on high dose, or it's not even a high dose of vitamin D?
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't consider 2,000 units of vitamin D to be a particularly high dose. But with that said, and I was actually speaking to Danny about this the other day, actually, is that I have seen people have negative subjective reactions to vitamin D doses. Typically, like we're talking 5,000, 10,000 doses of vitamin D. But with that said, I have seen people have a negative reaction to everything. I've seen at least one guy have a negative response to vitamin A, vitamin C, vitamin E, vitamin K, literally everything. Sometimes it's placebo. So it's hard to say. Now, I'm glad you liked the lecture on vitamin D. I need to go back and watch that because that was a while ago. And I'm wondering if any of my thoughts have changed. But I did research. I did a lot of research for that lecture. And I think I would stand by everything I said on that. I know recently at the Silverback Summit, Dr. Serrano was speaking about advocating for quite high doses of vitamin D, what I'd call mega doses of vitamin D. So in terms of the cofactor dosing, I mean, it would be interesting to know what the cofactor dosing that you're taking is. For something like this, I would recommend looking at the Thorne Basic Nutrients multivitamin because that multivitamin has 2,000 units of vitamin D. It's got 4,000, sorry, not 4,000, that would be crazy, 400 micrograms of vitamin K. So it's got a very robust amount of vitamin K. And it's also got, trace amounts of like magnesium and zinc and calcium in there too. So I would look at something like that to have everything in balance because taking individual nutrients in high doses can definitely dysregulate things. So I like to use the Thorne Basic Nutrients as a foundation. And then because that's got 400 micrograms of vitamin K in there already, that kind of gives leeway to be, better safe than sorry, to push vitamin D if needed for a deficiency all the way up to like 20,000 units. So I would look at trying the Thorne Basic Nutrients multivitamin, split it up so it's one in the morning, one at night. And then if that does well for you and restores your deficiency, fantastic. And then if more vitamin D is needed on top of that, then you could add extra vitamin D to that. But it would be more about the balance of the cofactors. And then if you were still having problems with it, did you say what the problems were?
Where is that question?
I can see it.
Yeah, it feels like garbage.
Yeah, it's tricky because there's a lot of things that can make you feel like garbage, and a lot of the time, the thing that is the trigger is not the cause. So if vitamin D in that context is still causing you to feel like garbage, then comprehensive blood work and assessment of all blood parameters, diet, lifestyle, etc., because it could be uncovering something else. And I would say that that's pretty likely.
What are your thoughts on MTHFR and how it can affect estrogen?
The motherfucker gene. So the MTHFR gene, I hope I didn't just destroy your YouTube monetization. Okay, so did this say what are my thoughts? Yeah, okay, so I can give my thoughts. So these are my thoughts. Okay, so this comes up a lot. And I think what's caused the resurgence in this is the work of Gary Brecker, because previously this was brought to the forefront in, I want to say, like the early 2010s. I don't know what the like 90s, noughties term for 2010 to 2020 is, but that kind of era, when Dr. Ben Lynch wrote a fantastic book called Dirty Genes. If anyone wants to learn about this gene, I recommend reading Dr. Ben Lynch's work or listening to his podcast. He's got some really in-depth science YouTube videos on it, but he's the guy for checking this out. And this became very popular in the naturopathy space for a while, because what would happen is people would go and see a naturopath typically, or a functional medicine doctor, and they would go in with a list of, vague and ambiguous symptoms, basically feel like crap. And the doctor would run the genetic test, which is present in, I believe, 40% of Caucasian people have some degree of MTHFR mutation. And then you would come back with being either homozygous or heterozygous for one or two of the SNPs, singular nucleotide polymorphisms, or SNPs. I'm just using big words to sound smart, SNPs. And then they would basically diagnose you as being a over or under methylator, depending on if your symptoms fall into this list or this list. And what Dr. Lynch highlights in his book is that this is like a gross oversimplification. This is not how methylation works. And people with the MTHFR gene are not broken. 40% of people can't have defective genes. That's not how basically we evolved and progressed as a species. If that was the case, it would have been bred out. Whether people believe in creation or evolution, it would have been bred out. The idea that 40% of Caucasian people, plus I'm not sure what the percentage of other ethnicities is, but if that degree of the population had a problem with methylation, which is a really important biological process, it wouldn't have been in the dominant bloodline. That's very simple. So the idea that these people are broken and then they can be cured by some overpriced B complex that the naturopath or functional medicine doctor prescribes you at an absurd markup is ludicrous. And then people have a placebo effect. They take a high dose of methylfolate or B12, which can give them some energy, and they go, oh, I'm cured. But then 3 or 4 months later, when the placebo effect wears off, they go back to square one. I've never met anyone long-term who go, this B complex solved all my issues. And for anyone who's been working with me, I've always recommended the Thorne Basic Nutrients multivitamin, which does contain a methylated B complex, which covers this off. And I've met people who were taking that and they went, oh, I listened to Gary Brecker's work. And then I'm not having a go at Gary Brecker, but this tends to be how the conversation goes. I listened to this guy, he did a podcast, I had the symptoms, I ran the genetic test, I took the B complex, and now I feel better. And then I'm sitting here being like, you've been taking that B complex for years. It's the same thing. And then it's a placebo effect. So the idea that people are broken in terms of methylation is wrong. But what Dr. Lynch talks about is that the methylation process in people with this gene, it's more like a thermostat that's a bit dysregulated rather than being too high or too low. So the idea is that, and I'm not going to get this right perfectly because it's all nonsense, but if you're a under-methylator, you need methyl donors. And then if you're an over-methylator, you need methyl buffers. That's the idea. In reality, you need more of both to bring the thermostat into balance. So basically, people with this gene have a higher nutritional requirement. You don't need to take mega doses in a capsule, but you have a higher nutritional requirement for methylfolate and B12, as well as things like creatine and glycine. which are also involved in the methylation process, and methionine as well. So all of these nutrients can be found in meat. So if you have the MTHFR gene, eat some meat, ideally minced meat, which is higher in collagen and then therefore glycine, or have a steak and some collagen, or a steak and a bone broth. But this is just a nutritional thing, which is basically if you have this gene, you have a slightly higher genetic requirement for these nutrients, which are found naturally in food. Methylfolate is higher in organ meat, it would seem, but you can get this all from the diet. But these people are not genetically broken. And if you want to cover off all this basis just to be safe than sorry, you can just take something again like the Thorne Basic Nutrients multivitamin, which covers all of this. And then you can get your creatine from food and your glycine from food as well.
Yeah, I understand. An interesting question that I have seen before the last years. If my blood work is within good ranges, but my total test is abnormally high, he says 1200, 1300, does this mean I should lower dosage? I feel awesome, more energy, focus, libido, and so on.
Yeah, we wouldn't want you feeling that. That's a problem. Feel awesome, more energy, more libido. Nah, that's a problem. You need to go back to feeling like crap. No, that's fantastic. So that level is not abnormally high. That's assuming that we're talking about total in the typical units used in the US. That's fantastic. That's typically the total level that people need, assuming that your SHBG is about average, to receive a therapeutic free testosterone level. The problem with the reference range is that the reference range has been driven down into the gutter, and it drops so rapidly in real time. Like in Australia, when I started doing this primarily, which was in 2019, the reference range was about, and we use different units, was 10 to 33 or 10 to 35. Now it's 5 to 25. Like that's a humongous drop. And that's just been in the recent 6 years. So this, if you actually go into PubMed, the total testosterone reference range for men of all ages, so we're talking, teenagers to geriatric elderly men, goes up to the high 1200s. So, I mean, the reference range at the moment is absurdly low, but no, this is not abnormally high. This is a therapeutic response to treatment. This is a healthy testosterone level for a healthy man, and that's why you feel good. So no, that's the goal, that you're feeling good. Keep it up. Don't worry about it. And yeah, that's a positive.
Sure. Hi, Dave. Would you recommend starting TRT after using PEDs for more than 7 years in my 20s? No, I'm off since about 6 years, but I feel low libido. I tried for a short time, 3 months, 100 milligram test E.
Okay. So one thing that's common in what I've seen from the bodybuilding space, and this is just what I've observed, is that there's this mentality, which is that if you blast with a really high dose of steroids, then you cruise at like a really low level of TRT, and then that's going to level out as healthy. That's not how it works. That's like saying if I drink 50 beers on Saturday and no beers for the other 6 days, then I'll be fine. No, it doesn't work like that. So unless you're really sensitive to it, 100 milligrams a week of testosterone enanthate is probably hypogonadal territory. I mean, that's too low for most people. So unless you're really sensitive to it, there would be no therapeutic response to being on 100 milligrams of testosterone enanthate a week. That's like a overcompensating cruise level that bodybuilders do, but that would basically be hypogonadal for most people. Now, I can't tell you that you should or shouldn't go on TRT, but you absolutely should look into it. In my experience, if men do steroid cycles prior to the age of 25, especially if they're doing it long term and like permablasting for a long period, the chance of you coming off that and having recovery of optimal androgen levels, even if you do whatever people would consider like the best PCT in the world, I mean, I wouldn't bet on those odds. I'd bet a significant amount of money against it, and I don't gamble. So that would be you definitely want to look into it. And the first mistake you made was just doing your own TRT and thinking that was going to work. So don't do that. Learn from your previous mistake of, hijacking your endocrine system and damaging your hormone production, and go to someone who is a specialist. And a good provider or a good clinic, and this group is full of them, between my clinics in Australia and Europe, the great partnered clinics that we all speak about in the UK, clinics like Eden Clinic or Alphagenics or Balance My Hormones, and then all the great providers we have in the US in this group. Any of these providers who are, worth what they do, they're not going to judge you or not give you access to treatment because of your history. They're going to go, oh, well, this guy probably does need treatment. I mean, I started TRT when I was 25. And if you've used anabolic steroids in your youth and you've damaged your endocrine system and you're still in your 20s, it's really important for you to seek treatment if you do need it and you are indeed hypogonadal, because otherwise you're going to age and deteriorate at such a rapid rate that by the time you get into your 30s and 40s, you're going to be in a pretty poor state of health. So a good clinic and provider will be very compassionate to this. They will work with you. If you worked with one of my clinics, we'd give you the hard word from the get-go and say, once you start prescribed TRT, you can't go back and just blast steroids because you're giving your word to your provider of what you're going to do. So if you want to do TRT, be a good patient, do it responsibly, listen to your provider. But this is absolutely something that you should look into.
Mm-hmm. Talking about PEDs, there's a super chat from Tarun with a question. EQ and DECA run together, but of course we cannot advise on the use of PEDs on this channel. We don't promote nor condone the use of PEDs. Anything you want to say about it, Dave? For entertainment purposes only?
For entertainment purposes only, I mean, they are two very psychoactive anabolic steroids and not in a good way. So equipoise gives a lot of men anxiety, and DECA, being a progestin, can also really mess with a lot of men's mood as well. So when you take those two things and put them in as a cocktail, would you have a fantastic anabolic response to diet and training stimulus? Probably. How is this going to end up for your health and subjective state and your overall endocrine system? You're kind of really, really rolling the dice there. One of the challenges with DECA that a lot of guys don't realize is that because the DECA, being short for nandrolone decanoate, that ester is so long and the progestin aspects of it are so suppressive to the HPTA axis that this can suppress your production for 6 to 9 months after you stop taking it. So be really careful if you're planning to use nandrolone decanoate for steroid cycles. But I don't recommend people use steroids at all. But if I was gun to my head, if I had to do some kind of steroid cycle, it would not be that one. So I wouldn't recommend it.
All right, that's fair. I'm on TRT and HCG. Should I take Nolvadex or tamoxifen for gynecomastia? I've already done surgery for gynecomastia before.
So questions like this are basically like, do I want you to punch me or kick me in the face? Neither. So it's a closed question, but the answer is neither. So if you've had gynecomastia surgery previously, and you're still getting gynecomastia growth on TRT, it generally means one of the following, if not both, is that one, the surgery was not done properly and they didn't remove the entire gland. I've heard surgeons often say, oh, you can't remove the entire gland. Maybe they can't, but other surgeons can. It's called a skill issue. But I've heard other surgeons say, oh, well, if you remove the whole gland, the nipple will cave in. There's two massive flaws to this. One, men who don't have gyno don't have caved in nipples. This is what happens to women. But number two, I'd rather have does any man care if their nipple is caved in? Like, really? No one cares. We just don't want gyno. So that's not a problem. It's a skill issue. So you need to find a surgeon who will take the whole thing out. But with that said, this is typically a problem that guys have when they're abusing steroids, because on TRT, typically if gyno becomes present, it's flaring up gynecomastia that was there already from when they were hypogonadal. This is when gynecomastia occurs, when you have low levels of androgens. High levels of androgens within the physiological range don't cause men to grow female mammary glands. It's just not how biology works. So if you're in a situation where you've had the majority of the gyno removed and you're on TRT and it keeps coming back, there's something wrong with the overall health or the protocol. And something that often causes this is guys are using, higher doses of TRT, and they might not be injecting it often enough, but they've got underlying issues that are leading to elevated levels of prolactin and estrogen together, which is typically, and again, this is not saying you need to use an AI or you need to use these medications. It's typically an issue with liver problems, too much alcohol, or insulin resistance. So if you're in a situation where you're highly insulin resistant and you're taking a large amount of testosterone and you're prone to gynecomastia, then that can continue the growth of gyno, because you're putting a very large amount of testosterone into an environment that wouldn't usually have it. And it's like pouring gasoline on a fire that you've only partially put out. So I would be getting comprehensive blood work done with someone who knows how to assess for these things. Hypothyroidism can also be a factor that can impact it a little bit, but it would have to be pretty severe. But I would be looking at alternate routes. Both tamoxifen and Clomid cause non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. They also both of them will make you feel terrible. And if you took them in a dose high enough to prevent gynecomastia growth, you would solve one problem, but probably create 10 more in the process. So I would take a left when you're taking a right.
I've heard the answer to the next question about 100 times last few years, but I'm sure Dave will be happy to answer his thoughts on Androgel. Philip writes, I got my natural levels from 400 to 800, 900. Also, my LH didn't suffer too much.
I appreciate your sarcasm is increasing. It's good to hear. Okay, so look, when it comes to Androgel, most guys would need to take a bath in it for it to work, just because the concentration is so low and the bioavailability is so low. The other problem with it is that because you have to use quite a bit of it and it's kind of like this transparent goo, it's kind of gross because you have to slather a huge amount of your body with it, and then you have to let it all absorb and transfer. When you're in Australia and you were growing up in the 90s, when you'd go to the beach or the pool, like your mum would like cover you in sunscreen and you'd feel all gross because there'd be so much sunscreen that doesn't absorb into your skin. I imagine that's what Androgel feels like. It's not a nice treatment to use. The reason that Stephen and I really like the 20% transscrotal cream is we're getting the equivalent of like 20 mil of Testosterone or Androgel, which is almost like a shot glass full, in like a tiny little amount, like the amount of toothpaste you'd put on a toothbrush. And it's made to absorb in a vanishing cream. So you can just basically, I mean, if I had some here, I would illustrate a point, but you can just rub it into your hand. It's just gone. I mean, you put it on the underside of the scrotum, but it's gone very quickly. So from a logistical standpoint, Androgel sucks. But it does work for some people. I've seen guys, and they'll come through our clinic in Australia where they're like, hey, these are my results on Testosterone, which is the same thing, or Andro Forte 5, which is like a commercial 5% cream. And they'll come in and their levels are great. And they're like, I feel great. And we're like, cool, let's keep doing this. Like if it ain't broke, don't fix it. It's just that these are outliers. Most guys don't do well. So the other thing that we've also noticed when guys get a little bit of a response to cream is that sometimes the LH levels don't suppress. If they're doing cream once a day and they're only getting a slight increase in levels and it's therapeutic enough to resolve symptoms and they feel good, sometimes the LH levels don't suppress. Typically, to get levels to be high enough to be therapeutic, they will suppress. But there are situations like this that do pop up. I can't say I've seen a lot of them, but I've seen enough of these to say that this does happen sometimes. It's not a 1 in a million. It's maybe a 1 in 100, but it does happen. So the main question with something like this is, how did you feel? And if you were like, I felt fantastic on this protocol, logistically, it wasn't annoying, I can get it really cheap through my insurance or my provider, cool, keep doing that, fantastic. I wouldn't recommend it for other people, but if this is what's worked for you, then great. Most commonly though, I see when guys start Androgel, their levels go from low to even lower, and they feel terrible. So yeah, that's more common on Androgel, but if it's working for you and you felt good, which is the most important thing, great. If you got that kind of level increase and you didn't really feel good, I mean, it would depend on if that increase was peak or trough, then you'd probably want to go for a stronger compounded transscrotal cream, which means you can use significantly less to have significantly more testosterone. But if it's working for you, great. But if you need a better response to treatment, I would go for a 20% transscrotal cream.
Another question on Accutane or isotretinoin. How common are the libido side effects of it? I've read some horror stories online. Well, I can tell you, I have prescribed this to literally thousands and thousands of young people, teenagers, and also people between their 20s and 30s for acne, men and women. And I've never encountered anyone that mentioned libido issues or whatever. Maybe they don't mention things like that in a dermatological practice. I don't know. Maybe it's because they are all very young and don't have any issues with hormones or whatsoever. But anyway, I couldn't explain any relationship between isotretinoin and hormones anyway. Have you heard those stories, Dave?
So Accutane, so my understanding of Accutane, I'm not versed on Accutane at all. I've been very blessed. I've never had a pimple. I've never used anything for skincare. When I was younger, I used the same bar of soap for everything. I mean, I've never had a problem with it. So it's never been something I've looked into. I may have been hit pretty hard with the hair loss, but I didn't get the acne. So I've never really looked into it. I like to stay in my lane and not express opinions that I have very weakly. My idea of Accutane, my understanding of it is that it's a retinoid. So it's like an analog of vitamin A.
Yeah.
So I would hypothesize that if there was a problem that came from Accutane use, it would be within the vitamin A pathway. But the solution for that, if that was indeed the factor, I wouldn't know what it was. The thing that I will say, and again, I'm absolutely not dismissing people. I know that there's the term like post-Accutane syndrome, like post-finasteride syndrome. I have no idea how much merit there is to it. It could be something that's really severe. It could be something that's complete nonsense or something in between. I don't know. But the thing that I will say, and I'm not dismissing anyone who has this, is that in my experience, a lot of people will have long-term problems and they will point at the most recent thing to blame for the stuff that was a problem beforehand. And sometimes something can exacerbate or make things worse, and that can be a placebo as well. But in my experience, there are a lot of people who've come to me who've said, this did this to me, but in reality, it was actually an ongoing thing and there was a completely different root cause. So I would always question if people online say a lot of things about a lot of stuff, but we never know the full story of what was going on before they made that post and how much of that content they omitted. So always take these kind of anecdotal stories with a grain of salt, but I have no idea on Accutane side effects.
Yeah, I've never heard mentioned it by any patient whatsoever in my practice, and there must be over thousands and thousands. I don't know, even theoretically, how a retinoid, vitamin A, can be related to whatever hormonal issue or whatever. So, yeah, but people say a lot of stuff online and they get things confused, and especially if they take things long term. It's like the long COVID thing. The strange thing is that only vaccinated people have this long COVID. So, very strange. So we have a lot of questions left, but we're already at the 1 hour mark. Maybe you have a look, Dave, at the questions. If there's anything you want to pick out, especially, I don't know.
I can go for as long as you want. Okay. I'm just going to jump at the ones that I'm just looking at. So, Dave, will your clinic be covering the UK in the future? Would love to try cream in the UK. Seen a lot of people saying they prefer it. No, we're not going to cover the UK because we have great relationships with clinics in the UK. and we don't want to step on their turf. There are fantastic options in the UK already for cream. The clinics that I mentioned before, so Dr. Max Draper, who's a friend of mine, he's been at the Silverback Summit the last couple of years at Alphagenics. He's great. He's also very aware and in agreement with myself regarding the benefits of the cream. I know Balance My Hormones are also doing the cream now, and I believe they've got their own pharmacy and they're making it themselves too. And I also believe the Eden Clinic does it too. So those are all great options. But yeah, we also don't want to deal with the UK regulations post-Brexit. But the UK, in my opinion, you guys are already well covered there. Okay, let's have I'm just going to read them out before I read the whole thing. So if some of these questions are a train wreck, then we're just going to have to deal with that as we go. I'm on TRT. I injected 30 milligrams of Test-C daily. Okay, so that would be 210 a week. I'm having libido issues. My SHBG is 20.5. My estrogen is 73. I'm assuming that's picogram per mil. And my testosterone is 1300, free 48. Okay, so yeah, that's about what you would typically see with that dose. And I 15% body fat. Okay. My question is, SHBG the issue or estrogen? Neither. So again, that's if we create closed questions, then we are going to get closed answers, but probably neither. So the problem that people have is that if you only look at this many variables, then you're confining to be like, well, it has to be one of these things. So the problem with libido is that the human body has a hierarchy of needs, and survival is number one and reproduction is last, from a biological standpoint, at least. So the problem is that libido is impacted by everything. And libido is really tricky because it's this balance of sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system activity. You have to be aroused, but relaxed. There's a whole bunch of stuff that has to go on. And in my experience, the most common thing that's causing the libido issue is the unresolved reason why you needed TRT in the first place. That's the most common thing. So I would be looking at diet and lifestyle. They're the big ones. Generally, and I did a whole lecture on this. It's on the channel. It's called Your Brain on Testosterone, War and Masculinity Part 2. Is you're either doing something that you know you shouldn't be doing, or you're not doing something that you know that you should be doing. There's something in that equation that's off. So you're taking part in something that you know is bad for you and you need to fix it, or you're not doing something that you know that you need to do and you're neglecting it. Generally, people know what this problem is. Fix that, and you'll be surprised that it might improve the libido. But if that doesn't make sense to you and you're like, nah, I'm nailing everything, you need much more comprehensive lab work. You need to check things like DHEA, thyroid, liver health. You need to check HbA1c for insulin sensitivity. I mean, if you're 15% body fat, you should be fine with that. But there are other factors, either hormonally or lifestyle-wise, that can be causing libido issues. And the other thing as well is, I mean, what's a libido issue? I mean, some people think that their libido is meant to be through the roof all the time. Doesn't work like that. The more stress and responsibility you have in life, the more normal or lower your libido is going to be due to stress. And TRT doesn't change that, unfortunately. Okay, let's have a look at this one. So since your recent podcast on Ali's page, I tried sub-Q shots. I went in the stomach. The smaller needle was great, but burned like hell. Yeah. Do you think a different location of shot would sting less? So if it burns, so subcutaneous injections of oil are always going to sting a little bit. Dr. Chrysler actually used to talk about how if you push the needle in too hard, too quickly, like it causes too much pressure, so the oil injects out too fast, and that can hurt. So sometimes it can just be a matter of just slowing down the pressure on the plunger. The other thing that can cause the issue is the testosterone formula itself. So if it's not pharmaceutical, like it can be higher in things like benzyl alcohol, which will sting more going in as well. And it can also be that the oil that you're injecting is very thick. The thicker the oil, the more it's going to sting going into the fat. So you could try a different location to see if it stings less, but those factors are going to be more of a variable. And it's very often that subcutaneous injections just don't work. Oil should go into muscle, and water can go into fat much easier. So MCT oil works best for subcutaneous injections, but it doesn't work for everyone. So keep that in mind. Okay. Just trying to see if there's any particularly profound. Are there any questions in here, Stephen, that you think are worth jumping on before we wrap up? Someone's asking which lectures are you referring to? So there's an entire lecture series that I did for the Silverback Summit that Ali actually gave us a copy of to upload on the channel. So the series is called Your Brain on Testosterone and the War on Masculinity. Part 1 is divided into 2 sections, and then there's a chapter 2 and chapter 3. The one I was referring to before is chapter 2. Chapter 1 is all on like the neuroscience of how testosterone works and the behavioral psychology of low and high testosterone. And then part 3 is actually from the Silverback Summit Live. And it's actually about the movie Cars. So it's a bit more engaging because it's live. But yeah, there's like 3 hours of lecture content on basically my entire, I guess, philosophical and scientific approach to TRT, particularly for young men and mental health. I strongly recommend anyone who enjoys my work to watch those because they're the best information that I have to offer. What clinics would you recommend for patients in the US, online clinics? So the US is weird because different states can't service other states. So not everyone can access every clinic without going there in person. And some states have different rules where you can go there once per year and different rules and regulations. But the clinics that you want to look at, so I have a partnership with Victory Men's Health. They're based in St. Louis. They are phenomenal. Their in-person offering is just incredible. You walk in and it's like a high-end barbershop, but everyone's been trained to the highest level by Neil Rousier, so that it's amazing. You've also got Justin's clinic. I need to ask Justin if his surname is pronounced Gross or Grosse. I've been saying Gross for a long time, but
it must be Groce.
Could be that too. So yeah, I need to talk to Justin, but Justin's fantastic. We'll find out. We'll find out. Someone brought it up the other day. They're like, maybe it's Grosse. I'm like, maybe it is. I've been saying it wrong. Justin's fantastic as well. You've also got Dr. Jordan Grant, who's based out of Texas. Gill's Clinic. I'm not sure. I think Gill's Clinic can do the whole country. I'm not sure. So they're called Elevate. They're great too. So all of those options are the clinics that are attached to this group who are fantastic. You've also got Dr. Jeffrey Ruderbush. He's in Florida. I may be forgetting someone off the top of my head, but if you go onto my website, which is www.advancedfundamentalhealth.com, on the homepage, you'll get a pop-up for a free FAQ download. And on the back page of that, I have all my recommended providers all over the world. So you can check out every country's recommended providers. They're all there for you, and it's a free FAQ. But when in doubt, just go to the moderators of our Facebook group and check out their clinics, and then also add Victory Men's Health to that list. Someone said, can you look at my question, please? Daniel M. Maybe if we scroll up, we can see his question. Daniel M. I can see it. Okay. I have Hashimoto's and take a pretty good amount of T3 medication and also on TRT. Okay. My question is, does SHBG bind to free T3 like it does free testosterone? No, there's a different binding protein for thyroid. So you can measure total T3 and T4 and free T3, T4, but the S in SHBG stands for sex, for hormone binding globulin. So there's a different binding globulin for thyroid hormone. But yes, there is that difference between free, so bound, and unbound. But it's not SHBG that binds the thyroid hormone. Hashimoto's is tricky because kind of like the MTHFR thing I spoke about before, it's kind of like you're a bit more of a broken thermostat on the lower side of things. So Hashimoto's can be really tricky. One of the challenges for Hashimoto's is that it's easy to get into the ballpark, but it's harder to close the gap on titrating the dose up without overshooting it. So a lot of the time people with Hashimoto's aren't quite taking enough thyroid hormone to optimize their treatment. And that needs to be looked at and addressed. So I hope that helps. This one's a good one. How do you think TRT treatment will evolve over the next 5 to 10 years? Any new science to look out for in optimization? So when I was in the US, I met the owner of a company called Kaisertrex, who are making an oral version of testosterone. So there are continued innovations in the field. Recently, people have also been talking about a nasal delivery option as well. Both of these options have drawbacks and limitations. And even when speaking with Kaisertrex, and I'm sure in the future he'd love to come on this channel and talk about the product too. I could be happy to link that up. They recognize that they will not replace injectables and topical cream. It's more so they're adding another option to the market. When it comes to the future of treatment, ideally, the things that I'd love to see an esterized version of luteinizing hormone. I think that would be great. If we could inject, esterized LH and FSH with testosterone, that'd be fantastic. Then we wouldn't have to have this whole HCG discussion. That'd be cool. I don't know if that'll happen, but I imagine the future will be finding a way that we can optimize levels without shutting down natural production. That's I think if people are going to innovate further, that'll be the thing that innovates. I think the next chapter for TRT, and again, I don't gamble, but I'd probably bet money on this, when testosterone undecanoate, which is known as Reandrin or libido, when that becomes generic, I think that's going to not completely replace enanthate and cypionate, but basically with libido, they say you can do one shot every 3 months and have stable levels. If that was the case, 4 jabs a year, that'd be great. It doesn't work like that. But they also said that you could do one shot of enanthate or cypionate every 2 to 3 weeks. That didn't work out either. But if we could do a shot of undecanoate every week and get the same stability as doing daily injections of cypionate, and the undecanoate is still 200 or 250 milligram per mil, if that became generically available, I think that's going to be the next thing. So in the next 5 or 10 years, when testosterone undecanoate becomes generic, I think weekly shots of that for stability, I think that will be the next step for injectable testosterone. But I also think we're going to see a significant increase in the popularity of the transscrotal cream. I think Dr. Keith Nichols has kind of spearheaded, and he's been talking about this stuff for years, and his content has aged really well on it, as well as you, Stephen. I mean, you've been talking about this for a long time too, and I think that cream is going to become more and more popular purely because more people are discovering that in practice it works really well. And I think that says a lot. I mean, we can have mechanistic theory and ideas and studies about stuff, but in practice, the cream works really well, and it works really well for people who don't respond well to injections. And I think that's a pretty remarkable thing. So I'd also recommend people check out Neil Rousier's new book. It's called Hormones Demystified. I've got a copy of it around here somewhere, but it's a very layman's book. It's an easy read. And if people want to learn more about the future of men's HRT, I think that more going into the full hormone optimization, so beyond TRT, which is the title of my book, but this kind of stuff that Neil's been talking about through WorldLink, Stephen's been using it for a while, Keith's been talking about it for a while, looking beyond TRT, but in terms of optimizing things like melatonin, thyroid, pregnenolone, DHEA, I think this is also going to be a big part of the future of it as well.
Mm-hmm. I've put the links to all your water masculinity videos, the 3 videos in the chat box for all you guys. There's still some new questions coming below in the chat box. If you still have time, Dave.
Yeah, let's do another 5 minutes. Someone said, appreciate if you can look at my question above. Jamie Holly. Maybe if we scroll up a little bit. Jamie. I can't. Oh, yeah, I got it. My doc told me to half my test dose because my estrogen was too high. Now I'm feeling like garbage. What should I do? Find a new doctor. That's easy. I mean, I can't give you personal advice, but I mean, if someone gave you the advice to jump off a cliff, I'd say that's a bad idea. Halving your test dose, even if your test dose was too high, unless it was astronomically through the roof and you're like a super sensitive responder, even that alone is, we don't cut test doses in half, we titrate it down. But based on the idea that estrogen was too high, I mean, that's, yeah, you need a new doctor. It's very, I really disagree with the idea that people should ignore what their doctor said and get advice online. What people need to do is go, the advice online is saying my doctor's wrong and I need to find another doctor. You need to find a doctor who gives you correct advice. So that's a big red flag, especially given that you feel like garbage. I mean, you did it and it didn't work out for you, which doesn't surprise me. But yeah, find a new doctor. Don't take advice online about how you should change your protocol. The only answer to this question, find a new doctor. And as I said, all the clinics attached to this group, I mean, this group has aggregated, all the best providers in the US, and we've got connections to other providers outside of the US. So when in doubt, I mean, one of the things that's sad is when I log into the Facebook group and see all these posts, I'm like, all of these issues could be presented if you just went to one of the clinics attached to this Facebook group. So yeah, the skill of the provider is the biggest variable in the outcome of your treatment, followed by how well you look after yourself. So get a better provider.
Let's see the last questions there.
Would you be cautious starting testosterone on a male 71 years old who has a slightly elevated hematocrit, 200 nanogram per deciliter with a free test of 7 and suffering many symptoms, including ED? The older the guy, the more you have to be careful with everything, because the longer someone's been alive, the more wear and tear they have. So the older someone is, the higher chance they already have developed multiple diseases of aging. So it's important to work with someone who specializes in men who are older. So Keith Nichols works with a lot of older guys. I mean, his practice is dedicated to, I think, men over 40, I think is his cutoff. So you want to find someone who's got specialty in working with men who are older. But when a man is older, it's really important that he has all his hormones tested, because at 71, the chance of him having optimal pregnenolone, DHEA, thyroid, melatonin is very unlikely. And if you just jack the testosterone up and all of those other hormones are deficient, you can create more problems than you solve. So you need someone to look into all the hormones and optimizing them all together. So anyone who's WorldLink trained, which is Neil Rousier's training program. So Victory Men's Health would also be suitable for that as well. But yeah, you need a provider who's going to look at all the hormones, not just testosterone. Much difference between the effects of 500 HCG 3 times a week versus 400 3 times a week? Probably not. HCG max, you get maximal Leydig cell stimulation with HCG at 250 units per shot. So HCG has got a 36-hour half-life. So with those things kept in mind, if you were going with 400 or 500, the difference is going to be negligible, because you're already past that saturation point. It would be more beneficial if you're wanting to max out the response from HCG to do daily injections, and keeping it under 250 units per injection would be beneficial. Okay, let's do the last one here and then we'll wrap it up. Mal, my question was not answered as well. Okay. Okay, Mal, you said, okay, I got it. We got it. I have a question regarding low estradiol. Mine has always been low, no matter if on cream or injections, and I never felt well, no libido. I lost both balls. I will check on DHEA and preg. I hope you find them. Sorry, that's a joke. My sense of humor is dry. My apologies for, I'm assuming you had an injury or testicular cancer. So not having testicles on TRT shouldn't impact hormone metabolism, but it could. I mean, it's possible that even though the testicles are not receiving a signal via LH and FSH, that they are still contributing to the enzymatic pool of how hormones are metabolized. We don't know. We haven't studied this. We have a study showing that, men who've had their testicles removed versus men who haven't have this level of response to things on TRT. We don't know. So it could be a factor. It may not be a factor at all. I can remember the rest of the questions. So when it comes to a situation like this, there's two ways of looking at this. So one is that serum estradiol, whether it's high or low, is not accurate. So just like high serum estrogen is not necessarily causing the problem, low estrogen is not necessarily causing the problem. But with that said, this kind of case is less straightforward because this could be a factor in what's going on, as well as what led to losing both testicles. Because if you had testicular cancer and went through chemotherapy, then there could also be systemic damage to the endocrine system as well. So I would be looking at everything. When in doubt, I also really like guys to have the pituitary MRI as well, because when there are systemic hormone deficiencies, it can be to do with something called empty sella, which is when the pituitary gland is kind of like hollowed out. It's a pituitary malformation. So I would be looking at all the hormones across the board, but I have never to date, and I'm very open to someone being the first, but I've never seen a man of any age needing to take exogenous estradiol. I haven't seen it yet. So I've seen a lot of guys try it and they all discontinued it. So it's more likely that it's not the factor and there's something else, but it's definitely a more kind of unique situation. So again, I'd look at someone who's WorldLink trained, Victory Men's Health, Keith Nichols, someone like Justin as well, who's into all of this more holistic stuff, to see if there is something else going on in a department that you haven't checked. I'd always recommend looking at the thyroid, checking full thyroid antibodies, but comprehensive blood testing, MRI of the pituitary, full breakdown of diet and lifestyle factors, and seeing if there's something off there will usually find the answer. It is, I guess, theoretically possible that someone who's had full testicular removal may not systemically make the correct amount of aromatase. It's possible, but it would definitely be a more unique circumstance that's not well studied.
Awesome. Thank you so much for your time, Dave. It
Very
was
welcome.
very enlightening again. So tell us, if people want to work with one of your clinics, how can they reach you?
Yeah, so you can reach me via my website, advancedfundamentalhealth.com. And if you want to work with Primal Zone in Australia, we're at primalzone.com, could be .au as well, I'm not sure about that. But if you search Primal Zone TRT on Google, we'll come right up. trtbaltic.com for all of Eastern Europe, the Baltic states, and soon to be Scandinavia too. We're currently taking patients. And then in the US, you can contact Victory Men's Health directly. I've got a bunch of video content coming over starting from this month and in the coming months for this YouTube channel. So I've got my Silverback Summit speech, my keynote from last year, as well as some masterclasses as well. So I've got a bunch of content coming up for this YouTube channel. So stay tuned, and I'll be rolling that out over the next few months.
Awesome, Dave. Thank you. Looking forward to it. Okay, enjoy the rest of your evening and talk to you next time.
You too. Thank you very much.
All the best, and thank you for watching, everyone. Bye-bye.